They laughed at her every single day. A poor young woman selling food by the roadside, giving away her last plate to a crippled beggar no one wanted to look at. While others walked past with disgust, she knelt, smiled, and fed him like he mattered, like he was human. But one morning the wheelchair never came. The empty space beside her wooden stall felt louder than insults, heavier than hunger. Then a black car appeared, a sealed envelope, a single instruction. What she was about to discover would shatter everything she thought she knew about kindness, poverty, and the man she called a beggar. This is not just a story about money. It is a story about the cost of having a good heart in a cruel world, and the shocking reward that waits for those who never lose it. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and your local time in the comments. And if stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us till the end. Her name was Abeni, and she was only 24 years old. Every morning before the city of Lagos fully woke up, before the horns, the shouting, and the endless rush of survival began, Abeni was already on her feet. The sky would still be pale and quiet when she tied her faded apron around her waist and stepped out of her small rented room. The room was barely big enough for a mattress and a plastic chair. No electricity, no running water, just cracked walls, a leaking roof, and silence that felt heavier at night. But Abeni never complained. She walked the short distance to the roadside where her food stall stood, a weak structure made of old wooden planks and rusted iron sheets positioned under a wide, aging tree. That tree had watched many things: arguments, laughter, hunger, and broken dreams. It also watched Abeni struggle day after day. She washed her hands with water from a small bucket, lit her charcoal stove, and began to cook. Rice, beans, yam porridge, sometimes jollof when she could afford tomatoes and pepper. Her movements were fast and practiced, but her eyes often looked far away, as if she were thinking of a life that had never been kind enough to stay. Abeni had no parents. She barely remembered their faces. They had died when she was still a child, leaving her behind with no inheritance except survival instincts and a stubborn will to live. There were no uncles checking on her, no aunties calling to ask if she had eaten, no siblings to share jokes with when the world felt too heavy. It had been just her for as long as she could remember, and yet people always noticed one strange thing about her. She smiled. Her slippers were worn thin at the soles. Her dress had patches sewn carefully at the elbows. Sometimes the smell of smoke clung to her hair for days. Still, when customers approached her stall, she greeted them warmly. "Good afternoon, sir." "You're welcome." "Good afternoon, ma. Please sit." Even when her back ached from standing too long, even when sales were slow, even when hunger whispered cruel things in her ear, Abeni greeted people with respect. Some noticed. Many didn't. Not far from her stall, another woman sold vegetables from a low table. Her name was Mama Sade, a loud, middle-aged woman who had survived life through toughness rather than tenderness. One afternoon, as Abeni wiped down her bench, Mama Sade watched her for a while and shook her head. "Abeni," she called out, "why are you always smiling like this? Life is hard for all of us." Abeni looked up, her lips curling into that familiar, gentle smile. "If I cry," she said calmly, "will it bring more food to my pot?" Mama Sad laughed loudly, the kind of laugh that came from years of disappointment. "You're a strange girl," she replied, waving her hand and turning back to her vegetables. But Abeni's words stayed with her. Life was hard. That was true. Some days she barely sold enough to replace the ingredients she used. Other days, customers ate and promised to pay tomorrow, a tomorrow that never came. Still, Abeni never chased anyone away angrily. When children came with empty pockets and hopeful eyes, she sometimes served them small portions for free. "Just eat," she would say. "You can pay next time." She did not see generosity as weakness. To her, it was the only way to remain human in a place that constantly tried to strip people of their dignity. Every afternoon when the sun stood high and cruel above the road, something unusual happened. From the far end of the street, a sound would slowly approach. Creak, creak, creak. It was the sound of old wheelchair wheels scraping against stones. People passing by already knew what it meant. Some rolled their eyes, some laughed. Others pinched their noses as if preparing for something unpleasant. The man in the wheelchair always came alone. He was old, maybe in his late 60s or early 70s. His legs were wrapped in dirty bandages, stiff and unmoving. His trousers were torn at the knees. Dust clung to his skin like a second layer. His hair was rough and gray, and his face carried the exhaustion of someone the world had long stopped caring about. Children whispered and pointed. Look at him, that dirty beggar again. Does he even wash? Some people crossed to the other side of the road to avoid him. Others dropped insults like coins and kept walking. But Abeni never turned away. The first time she saw him, she didn't know why her chest tightened. Maybe it was the way he pushed himself forward with tired hands. Maybe it was how his eyes never met anyone's gaze. Maybe it was because he looked like someone who had once been important to somebody and then forgotten. That day, as he stopped near her stall, Abeni looked at him and smiled. "Good afternoon, Papa," she said softly. The old man lifted his head, slightly surprised. He nodded but said nothing. From that day, she began to call him Papa Tunde, not because she knew his name, but because to her, calling someone Papa meant acknowledging their humanity. Papa Tunde never begged with his mouth. He didn't stretch out his hands or shout at passers-by. He simply sat quietly in his wheelchair beside Abeni's stall, his head bowed, his hands resting on his useless legs. His presence was easy to ignore if one wanted to. Abeni didn't. Every day he appeared, she served him a plate of food, sometimes rice, sometimes beans and yam. She placed it gently beside him and walked away, giving him space and dignity. One afternoon, after serving her last customer, Abeni noticed Papa Tunde hadn't touched his food. "Papa," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "Is everything okay?" The old man swallowed hard. "I was too weak to come yesterday," he said quietly. "I have not eaten in 2 days." Abeni looked back at her table. Only one plate remained. That plate was meant for her. Her stomach tightened. For a brief moment, a very brief moment, she hesitated. Hunger was not a stranger to her. She knew its voice well, but something louder spoke inside her chest. Without saying a word, she picked up the plate and placed it in front of him. "Please eat," she said. Papa Tunde stared at the food, then at her. "You're giving me your last plate again?" he asked, his voice trembling. Abeni nodded. "I can manage." His hands shook as he took the spoon. His eyes grew wet, but he did not cry. He bowed his head and began to eat slowly, like someone afraid the food might disappear if he rushed. People watched. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered that she was foolish. But Abeni felt something warm settle in her heart. She did not know it yet, but the choices she made beside that dusty road, small, quiet choices, were already shaping a future she could never have imagined. As the days passed, the roadside began to recognize Abeni not just as the girl who sold food, but as the girl who never hardened. Every morning followed the same rhythm. Before sunrise, while most of the neighborhood still slept, Abeni lit her charcoal stove and stirred her pots. The smoke rose gently into the early air, clinging to her clothes and skin. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, shaped by years of necessity. But inside her chest, thoughts moved slowly, carefully, like fragile things she did not want to break. There were mornings when the weight of loneliness pressed so hard against her ribs that breathing felt like work. On those days, she would pause, close her eyes, and whisper a short prayer, nothing dramatic. Just a request for strength. Just enough to get through another day. People often assumed Abeni was simple-minded because she smiled too much. They didn't know that every smile was a decision. She had learned early in life that bitterness spread faster than hunger. She had watched other young women grow sharp with anger, quick to insult, eager to fight the world that had already beaten them down. Abeni chose something else not because it was easy, but because it was the only way she could survive without losing herself. One afternoon, while the sun hung heavy above the road, Mama Sede walked over again, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You're still feeding that old man?" she asked, nodding toward Papa Tunda, who sat quietly in his wheelchair. "Yes," Abeni replied simply. Mama Sade clicked her tongue. "Abeni, you have no husband, no parents, no helper. Tomorrow is not promised. Why waste your food on someone who cannot help you back?" Abeni paused before answering. She scooped rice into a plate, her movements steady. "If tomorrow is not promised," she said calmly, "then today is all we have." Mama Sad stared at her, speechless for a moment. "You think kindness will pay your rent?" she scoffed. Abeni smiled again, not mockingly, not proudly, but softly. "No," she said, "but it helps me sleep at night." Mama Sad shook her head and walked away, muttering about foolish youth. But Papa Tunda had heard everything. He lowered his head even further that day, his shoulders sagging like someone carrying a weight too heavy to name. When Abeni brought him his plate, he hesitated. "You shouldn't let people talk to you like that because of me," he murmured. Abeni knelt beside him and placed the plate on the stool next to his chair. "People will talk, whether we are kind or cruel," she said. "I would rather they talk while I'm doing what feels right." Papatunde studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to memorize it. "You are different," he said quietly. Abeni laughed softly. "No, Papa. I'm just poor." But deep inside, something in Papatunda shifted. Days turned into weeks. Papatunda never missed a day except that one time he had been too weak to come. Rain or heat, he always arrived around the same hour, pushing himself slowly along the uneven road. His wheelchair looked more fragile with each passing day. One wheel leaned slightly to the side, threatening to give up completely. Still, he never complained. Sometimes after eating, he would sit silently for a long time, listening to the sounds of the street. Other times, he spoke in short sentences, never about himself, never about his past. Abeni noticed these things, though she never pressed him. She talked enough for both of them. She told him about rising food prices, about customers who promised to pay later, about children who smiled with tomato-stained mouths. She talked about how the city felt too loud sometimes and how silence at night frightened her more than noise ever could. Papatunda listened, really listened. He never offered advice, never corrected her. He simply nodded, absorbing her words like they mattered. One day a group of young men passed by, laughing loudly. One of them pointed at Papatunda. "Old man, why don't you beg properly?" he mocked. "At least cry or shout so people will pity you." The others laughed. Abeni's chest tightened. She stood up straight and faced them. "He is not an animal for your entertainment," she said firmly. "If you cannot help, pass quietly." The young men were startled by her courage. One of them shrugged. "Relax, food seller," he said. "We're just joking." But they walked away. Papatunda looked at Abeni, his eyes shining with something deeper than gratitude. "No one has spoken for me like that in years," he said. Abeni shrugged lightly. "Then they have been blind for years." She did not know it, but every act of defense, every quiet stand was being recorded not by cameras or witnesses, but by a conscience that had been searching for truth. One afternoon, the heat was unbearable. The road shimmered. Sweat soaked through Abeni's dress as she served two schoolboys their lunch. When she turned back, Papatunda was already seated in his usual spot. His bandages looked older. His hands trembled slightly. She scooped jollof rice into a plate, hesitated, then added 2 small pieces of meat, something she rarely did. "Papa," she said gently, "today you will eat well." He looked up surprised. "You added meat." Abeni smiled. "Today feels like it needs meat." As she placed the plate down, she leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Even if the whole world forgets you," she said quietly, "I won't." The words landed deeper than she realized. Papa Tunda's throat tightened. He stared at the food, then at her, and for a moment his composure almost broke, but he held himself together, nodding slowly. That was the exact moment a black luxury car rolled to a stop in front of the stall. Its engine purred softly, completely out of place on that dusty road. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. His clothes were crisp, his shoes gleamed. His presence commanded attention without a word. Abeni straightened instinctively. "Good afternoon, sir," she greeted. "Good afternoon," the man replied, but his eyes were not on her. They were fixed on Papa Tunde. He stared openly, intensely, as if looking at something impossible. Papa Tunde froze mid-bite. The spoon trembled in his hand. For a few seconds, the world seemed to pause. Then the man turned to Abeni. "1 plate of jollof rice," he said. "Add meat." As she served him, she noticed his eyes flick back to Papa Tunde again, this time with uncertainty, almost disbelief. The man took his food, hesitated, then walked back to his car without another word. As the car drove away, Abeni felt a chill crawl up her spine. She looked at Papa Tunde. He had stopped eating. "Papa," she asked softly, "do you know that man?" Papa Tunde lowered his eyes. "No," he said, but something in his voice told a different story. And for the first time since he had begun coming to her stall, Abeni felt the quiet certainty that Papa Tunde was not just a forgotten old man. Something about him was waiting to be revealed. The next morning arrived without warning. Abeni woke up before dawn, as she always did, but something felt wrong even before her feet touched the ground. The air was unusually still. No birds argued on the rooftops. No distant horns complained about traffic. It felt like the city was holding its breath. She pushed the door of her small room open and stepped outside. The ground was cold beneath her slippers. As she walked toward her stall, her eyes drifted automatically to the far end of the road. That was where Papa Tunde always appeared. Creak, creak, creak. That sound had become part of her routine, like the smell of smoke or the crackle of charcoal. But that morning there was nothing. Just silence and dust. "It's still early," she told herself. She cleaned her bench, wiped her wooden table, and arranged her plates neatly. She lit the stove and poured water into the pot. As the water began to heat, she kept glancing up the road. Nothing. Minutes passed, then an hour. Customers began to arrive. Some ordered rice, others asked for beans. Abeni served them as usual, smiling when expected, greeting politely, but her eyes kept drifting to the empty space beside her stall. Papa Tunde never came late. By mid-morning, unease had settled deep in her chest. She walked toward Mama Said's vegetable table. "Auntie," she asked quietly, "have you seen Papa Tunde today?" Mama Said looked up briefly, unimpressed. "That old man," she scoffed. Maybe he finally got tired of suffering. Abeni forced a small smile, but her heart tightened. She asked the boys selling sachet water nearby. They shook their heads. She asked a bike man who usually parked under the tree. He spat on the ground and shrugged. "Beggar like that can disappear any time," he said. "Why worry yourself?" Abeni returned to her stall, her steps slow. She stared at the spot where Papa Tunde usually sat. The ground there was slightly darker, worn by the wheels of his chair. Seeing it empty felt wrong, like a sentence that ended halfway. By noon, her appetite was gone. She served customers automatically, her movements stiff, her smile forced. When she tried to eat, the smell of food turned her stomach. She pushed the plate aside. Maybe he's sick, she whispered to herself. Maybe tomorrow. But when tomorrow came, Papa Tunde still did not appear. Nor the day after that. Each morning, Abeni woke with a knot in her stomach. Each afternoon, she stared at the road until her eyes burned. Each night, she returned to her room feeling heavier than when she had left. On the third night, rain fell. Abeni sat on her mattress, listening to water drip through the cracked roof into a plastic bowl. The room smelled of dampness and smoke. She reached for the metal plate she often used to serve Papa Tunde and held it in her hands. "He never misses," she whispered, "even when rain poured, even when the sun scorched, even when his hands shook from hunger." Her chest tightened painfully. She stood up and opened her small window, peering into the dark street. The rain washed the road clean, but it could not wash away the fear creeping into her heart. Something was wrong. And deep inside, Abeni knew this was not just a coincidence. The next morning, 4 days after Papa Tunde's disappearance, Abeni sat quietly at her stall, slicing onions. Her movements were slower now, more careful. The sparkle that once lived easily in her eyes had dulled. Smoke rose from the stove, curling around her face. Then, without warning, a black car pulled up in front of her stall. It was not the same one from before. This one was longer, darker, more intimidating. A tall man stepped out. He wore an expensive red cap, polished shoes, and clothes that did not belong on that road. His face was expressionless. He did not greet her. He did not even look at the food. He walked straight up to her table and placed a brown envelope on it. Abeni froze. What is this?" she asked, her voice barely steady. The man leaned closer. "Read it," he said quietly. "And don't tell anyone." Before she could ask another question, he turned, got back into the car, and drove away. The entire exchange lasted less than a minute. Abeni stood still, her heart pounding wildly. People nearby continued their business, unaware that something life-altering had just been placed in front of her. She looked left. She looked right. No one was watching. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single white sheet of paper. The words were few but heavy. "Come to Green Hill Hotel by 4 p.m. Do not tell anyone. From a friend." Abeni's breath caught. "Green Hill Hotel," she whispered. She had heard of it. Everyone had. It was the kind of place rich people talked about. The kind of place she passed by in buses, staring through windows like someone looking into another world. She folded the paper slowly and pressed it to her chest. Who sent this? And why her? Her thoughts raced back to Papa Tunde, to the black car, to the man who had stared at him like a ghost from the past. Her hands began to shake. By 3:30 p.m., Abeni stood in front of her stall, staring at the rusty padlock in her hand. She had never closed her shop this early before. "God," she whispered, "please go with me." She locked the door, turned the key twice, and stepped onto the road. A tricycle stopped and she climbed in. "Green Hill Hotel," she said, as they drove through the busy streets of Lagos. Abeni held the envelope tightly, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. Every honk, every shout, every passing face felt unreal. When the hotel finally came into view, her breath left her body. The building rose tall and proud, its glass walls reflecting the sky. Everything about it screamed wealth, cleanliness, control. 2 security men stood at the gate. One of them stepped forward. "Good afternoon, madam. Who are you here to see?" Abeni swallowed hard. I received this," she said, handing over the paper. "My name is Abeni." The guard read it once, then smiled. "Oh," he said politely. "We've been expecting you." Her heart skipped. A man in a black suit appeared almost immediately and gestured for her to follow him inside. As they walked through the long, quiet hallway, Abeni's legs felt weak. The floor beneath her feet was smooth and shiny. The air smelled clean, nothing like the streets she knew. The man stopped in front of a tall brown door. "Someone is waiting for you inside," he said calmly. "You're safe." Abeni raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle. Whatever waited behind that door was connected to Papa Tunde. She knew it. Taking one deep breath, Abeni pushed the door open. The door opened slowly, almost silently. For a heartbeat, Abeni thought her eyes were lying to her. The man seated in the wheelchair at the center of the room looked familiar, yet completely different. The face was the same face she had seen covered in dust and exhaustion. But now it was clean, calm, and composed. His hair was neatly trimmed. His white shirt was crisp, fastened with gold buttons that caught the light. A polished wristwatch rested on his arm. The wheelchair beneath him was no longer old and shaking. It was modern, sleek, and spotless. "Abeni," he said gently. Her knees weakened. Papa Tunde," she whispered, clutching her chest. The man smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Yes," he said. "It's me." Abeni took a step back, her breath shallow. The room felt too large, too quiet. Her thoughts collided with one another, each louder than the last. This was not the man who sat silently beside her stall. This was not the man people mocked and ignored. "Please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Sit down." She obeyed without realizing it. Her movements stiff, her eyes never leaving his face. "My name is not Papa Tunde," he continued softly. "That was only a name you gave me. My real name is Chief Adewale Ogun." The name landed heavily in the air. Chief. Abeni's fingers curled into her palms. "I am a businessman," he said. "I own companies across this country: construction, agriculture, transport, hospitals, schools." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I am a billionaire." The word felt unreal, like something meant for television, not for rooms like this, not for girls like her. "But," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "Why?" Chief Adewale leaned back slightly, studying her the way one studies something rare. "Because I needed to know who people really are," he said. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I have been rich most of my life. I have been praised, greeted, welcomed, and assisted always. People open doors quickly when they think you have money behind you. I grew tired of it." Abeni stared at him, stunned. "I wanted to know how people behave when there is nothing to gain," he continued. "When no one is watching. When kindness costs something." Her eyes burned. "So I dressed like a broken man," he said quietly. "I sat where no one wanted to sit. I became someone people ignored." He leaned forward slightly, and I watched. Abeni's throat tightened painfully. "You gave me food," he said. "Not once. Not when it was convenient. Every day. Even when it was your last plate." Her mind flashed to that moment, the hesitation, the hunger, the decision. "You never asked me for money," Chief Adewale went on. "You never asked my name. You never demanded gratitude. You treated me like a human being." Abeni shook her head slowly. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear, I didn't know you were—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "That is exactly why you are here." Silence filled the room. Chief Adewale straightened his back and continued. "Every year," he said, "I choose 10 people. Not from offices, not from business meetings, but from the streets. From places where truth lives." Abeni's heart pounded. "I help them rebuild their lives," he said. "Because people with good hearts do not just change their own stories, they change others." Tears spilled over her cheeks. "I didn't help you because I wanted anything," she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't watch you suffer." Chief Adewale's eyes softened. "That," he said, "is why you passed the test." Abeni wiped her tears, still overwhelmed. "But The wheelchair, she said, her voice trembling. Your legs. Chief Adderwale placed his hands firmly on the arms of the chair. Then slowly, deliberately, he stood up. Abeni gasped. He took one step, then another. You can walk, she whispered, almost afraid to speak louder. Yes, he said calmly. I always could. Her mind reeled. Why pretend, she asked. Why go that far? Chief Adderwale looked directly into her eyes. Because I wanted to know if anyone would still care, he said, even when I looked completely broken. Abeni covered her mouth as fresh tears flowed. I didn't see a test, she said. I just saw a man. He smiled. That is everything. Chief Adderwale walked to the door and opened it. Come with me, he said. There is something I want to show you. Abeni stood slowly, her legs unsteady. Outside, the hallway was lined with men in black suits. They nodded respectfully as Chief Adderwale passed. When they stepped outside the hotel, Abeni froze. 5 black SUVs waited in a perfect line. She had never seen anything like it. One of the men opened the door for Chief Adderwale. He turned back and smiled at her. Come, he said. Abeni entered the car, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. As the convoy moved, her heart raced with questions she couldn't ask. Where were they going? What was happening to her life? The city passed by in a blur, the noise, the crowd, the chaos she knew so well faded as they turned onto a quiet, clean road lined with modern buildings. Then the cars stopped. Chief Adderwale stepped out first. Abeni followed. She looked up and froze. Before her stood a massive, elegant building. Glass walls stretched upward, reflecting the sun. White stone shimmered like marble. Gold handles glinted on tall doors. Flowers lined the entrance. Her breath caught. Then she saw the sign. Abeni's place, home of sweet meals. The world tilted. This is not real, she whispered. Chief Adderwale nodded. It is, he said, and it is yours. Her knees buckled. Mine. He placed a set of keys in her trembling hands. You fed me when you had nothing, he said. Now I want to give you a place where your kindness can feed thousands. Abeni fell to her knees, sobbing. Inside the restaurant was breathtaking, shining floors, elegant tables, a fully equipped kitchen, uniforms neatly prepared for staff she had not yet met. I don't deserve this, she cried. Chief Adderwale knelt beside her. Kindness always deserves to be seen, he said. Even when the world pretends it doesn't. From that day, Abeni's life changed forever. But her heart did not. She ran her restaurant with humility. She treated her workers with respect. And every week, a white food truck bearing the words Abeni Food Love rolled through the city, under bridges, by bus stops, into forgotten corners, feeding those the world ignored. One afternoon, as she handed food to a barefoot child, Abeni looked up at the sky and smiled. Thank you, she whispered. Not for the money, but for proving that kindness, real kindness, was never invisible. The opening of Abeni's place did not happen quietly. On the first morning, the sun rose gently over the glass building, as if curious about what kindness looked like when it finally had space to breathe. The doors opened early, and within hours, people began to gather outside, some because they were hungry, others because they were curious, and many because they had heard the impossible story spreading through Lagos like wildfire. A roadside food seller, a beggar in a wheelchair, a billionaire. Abeni stood inside her new restaurant, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, watching from a distance. She wore a simple dress, not the expensive outfits the stylists had suggested. She still felt like a visitor in a place that carried her name. Madame Abeni, one of the managers, said gently, "Everything is ready." She nodded, her throat tight. The first customers walked in hesitantly, unsure if they belonged in such a beautiful space. Abeni noticed it immediately, the way their steps slowed, the way their shoulders curved inward, the way their eyes scanned the room like they were waiting to be told they didn't belong. She walked toward them herself. "Good morning," she said warmly. "You're welcome." The words felt familiar, safe. The tension melted from their faces. That was when Abeni understood something important. Wealth could build walls, but kindness kept doors open. As days passed, Abeni's place became more than a restaurant. It became a place where people felt seen. The staff noticed it too. Abeni greeted everyone by name. She listened. She asked about sick children, aging parents, late buses. She paid fair wages and insisted on respect. Some of the workers whispered among themselves. "She doesn't act like a rich woman," one said. "She acts like someone who remembers hunger," another replied. Chief Adawale visited occasionally, always quietly, never announcing himself. He would sit in a corner observing, not testing anymore, just watching the ripple effect of one good heart placed in the right position. One afternoon, as he sat sipping water, he called Abeni over. "You've done well," he said. Abeni smiled politely. "I'm just trying not to forget." He studied her. "Forget what?" "Where I stood," she replied, "and where many people are still standing." That was when she told him about her idea. "I want to take food to the streets," she said hesitantly. "Not leftovers, not charity scraps, real meals, hot meals." Chief Adawale's eyes lit up, not with surprise, but with approval. "Then do it," he said simply. Within weeks, Abeni Food Love was born. A white food truck rolled through the city every Saturday morning, its sides painted with gentle colors. And a simple message: "You are not forgotten." The first stop was under a bridge where homeless families slept on cardboard. Children ran toward the truck laughing. Old men stood in disbelief. Abeni stepped down herself, tying an apron around her waist. One of the workers whispered, "Madam, you don't have to do this yourself." Abeni shook her head. "I do." She served plates with the same care she once gave Papa Tunde. She knelt when necessary. She listened. She learned names. She remembered faces. A woman holding a baby burst into tears when Abeni handed her food. "No one has ever asked me how I'm doing." The woman sobbed. Abeni held her hand. "How are you doing today?" That night, Abeni returned home exhausted but lighter. Her room was no longer small or dark. But before sleeping, she sat quietly on her bed and closed her eyes. Memories of the roadside returned: smoke, dust, laughter, hunger. She did not miss the pain, but she honored it. As months passed, Abeni's story reached places she never imagined. People spoke about her on radio shows. Blogs wrote about the girl who fed a beggar and changed her destiny. Some praised her, some doubted her. A few accused her of exaggeration. Abeni stayed silent. She did not need to defend the truth. She had lived it. One evening, as she closed the restaurant, she noticed a familiar figure across the street, a man in worn clothes standing awkwardly, unsure whether to approach. His leg dragged slightly as he walked. Abeni's heart tightened. She stepped outside. "Good evening," she said softly. The man flinched, clearly not expecting kindness. I heard you help people," he said quietly. Abeni smiled. "Sit," she said, pulling out a chair. "Tell me your story." As she listened, she realized something profound. The cycle had turned. She was now the one with the power to choose compassion, and she was choosing it again. Later that night, she called Chief Adawale. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. Pretending to be poor. There was a pause on the other end. "No," he said, "because it reminded me who I am." Abeni nodded, even though he couldn't see her. That was when she understood that the greatest gift she had received was not the restaurant, the money, or the security. It was the permission to remain soft in a hard world, and she intended to protect that gift no matter how high she rose. Success, Abeni quickly learned, came with a different kind of hunger. It was quieter than the hunger she once knew, but sharper in its own way. People no longer looked at her with pity. They looked with curiosity, with expectation, with calculation. Some came smiling too widely. Others spoke softly but watched closely. Within 3 months of opening, Abeni's place invitations began to arrive: business proposals, partnerships, interviews, events. Men in polished shoes and women with carefully chosen words wanted to sit across from her and talk about growth, branding, and visibility. Abeni listened. She nodded politely. She thanked them, but she did not rush. One afternoon, a well-known investor visited the restaurant. He praised the food, the atmosphere, the story. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "You have something powerful here," he said. "But charity is expensive. Feeding people for free, that drains profit. If you want to scale, you'll need to reduce that." Abeni stared at him calmly. "Reduce what?" she asked. "The free food trucks," he replied. "They don't bring returns." Abeni smiled slowly, carefully. "They bring returns," she said. "Just not the kind you can measure." The investor laughed, assuming she was joking. She wasn't. Word spread quickly that Abeni was difficult, that she didn't understand business the way serious people did, that her kindness would eventually ruin her. Chief Adawale heard it too. One evening he invited her to his office. The building was tall and impressive, filled with quiet confidence. As Abeni sat across from him, she felt the old unease return, the feeling of being small in a large room. "You are doing well," he said. "But I hear you are turning people away." "I am," she replied honestly. "Why? Because some doors only open if you agree to close others," she said. "And I'm not ready to decide who deserves help and who doesn't." Chief Adawale studied her carefully. "This path will not always be easy," he warned. "People will test you. Some will try to use your past to control your future." Abeni nodded. "I know. Then why continue?" She took a deep breath. "Because the day I stop feeding the hungry," she said, "is the day Papa Tunde disappears from my memory." Chief Adawale leaned back, a slow smile forming. "Then you are stronger than I thought." The real test came shortly after. One rainy afternoon, as the restaurant bustled with customers, a woman stormed in. Her clothes were expensive, her voice sharp. "I want to see the owner," she demanded. Abeni stepped forward. "I'm here." The woman laughed bitterly. "You? This place is owned by a billionaire, not a former food seller." Abeni remained calm. "How can I help you?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "I heard you give food to beggars," she said loudly. "That you bring dirty people into this place. That stops today." The room went quiet. Abeni felt every eye turn toward her. "This is a respectable establishment," the woman continued. "You can't mix charity with class." Abeni did not raise her voice. "Madam," she said gently, "this place exists because someone once fed a man everyone else avoided." The woman scoffed. "That's a nice story. But this is business." Abeni took one step closer. "And my business," she said firmly, "is dignity." The woman left in anger, promising consequences. That night, Abeni couldn't sleep. Doubt crept in quietly. Was she being stubborn? Was she risking everything for a principle? She sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering Papa Tunde's bowed head, his trembling hands, the way he had eaten slowly, afraid food might be taken away. Her chest tightened. "No," she whispered, "I'm not changing." The next week, a rumor spread online. Someone claimed Abeni's story was fake, that she had paid an actor to pretend to be a beggar, that Chief Adawale had staged everything for publicity. The comments were cruel. "She's lying. Another scam. Don't be fooled." Abeni saw the posts late at night, scrolling alone. For the first time since her life changed, she cried. Not because of money, not because of reputation, but because she had learned how easily the world punished softness. The following morning, she considered canceling the food truck. Just for a week, she told herself. Just to breathe. Then she arrived at the bridge. Children were already waiting. One of them, a small boy with dusty knees, ran toward her. "Are you the food auntie?" he asked excitedly. Abeni swallowed hard. "Yes." "We thought you wouldn't come," he said. "But you came." Something inside her settled. She served food that day with renewed purpose. That evening, Chief Adewale made a public statement. He confirmed everything. Not to defend Abeni, but to remind the world that truth did not need permission to exist. The noise faded slowly, but the lesson remained. Kindness, Abeni realized, would always be tested at higher levels, not because it was weak, but because it was powerful. And power made people uncomfortable. Fame changed the way people said Abeni's name. Some spoke it with admiration, others with envy, a few with quiet resentment. What none of them understood was that success did not erase the past, it amplified it. Every time Abeni walked through the glass doors of her restaurant, she carried two lives inside her. One belonged to the woman she had become confident, respected, listened to. The other belonged to the girl she used to be barefoot in her room at night, counting coins, praying hunger would not win. The past did not leave her alone just because she had money now. One evening after the restaurant had closed, Abeni sat in her office reviewing reports when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello," she answered. There was a pause. Abeni, a woman's voice, said slowly, carefully, "It's me. Auntie Morayo." Abeni's fingers tightened around the phone. Auntie Morayo. The woman who had taken her in briefly after her parents died. The woman who had promised to care for her and then sent her away when feeding another mouth became inconvenient. "I heard your name on the radio," Morayo continued. "They said you're rich now." Abeni closed her eyes. "I'm not rich," she replied quietly. "I work." Morayo laughed nervously. "Ah, you've always been like this, so proud." "Listen, my daughter, life has not been easy for me. My children," Abeni felt a familiar ache rise in her chest. "What do you want, Auntie?" she asked gently. Another pause. "I was thinking you could help us," Morayo said. "Just small support. You know, family. Family." The words sat heavily between them. That night, Abeni could not sleep. She remembered sleeping on Morayo's floor, eating leftovers, being reminded daily that she was a burden. She remembered the day she was told to leave, handed a small bag, and warned not to return. Forgiveness was easier in stories than in real life. The next morning, Abeni asked Chief Adewale for advice. "You owe no one your healing," he said calmly. "But kindness does not mean forgetting boundaries." Abeni nodded. She invited Morayo to the restaurant. When the woman arrived, she gasped at the elegance of the place. Her eyes widened as she took in the space, the staff, the name on the wall. "You've done well," she said softly, almost reverently. Abeni offered her food and listened as Morayo spoke about her struggles. She listened without bitterness, without accusation. Then she spoke. "I can help you," Abeni said. "But not because we are family. I will help because I choose kindness." Morayo's eyes filled with tears. "I don't need you to rewrite the past," Abeni continued. "I need you to respect who I am now." Morayo nodded, ashamed. When she left, Abeni felt lighter. Some doors, she realized, did not need to be reopened. They only needed to be closed gently. Meanwhile, Abeni food love continued to grow. The food trucks expanded to new neighborhoods. Volunteers signed up. Donations came in not because Abeni asked, but because people believed in what they saw. One afternoon, as Abeni served food near a bus stop, an elderly man approached her slowly. He walked with difficulty, leaning heavily on a stick. "I recognize your face," he said. Abeni smiled. "From where?" "From the road," he replied. "Years ago I sat where your Papa Tunda used to sit." Her heart skipped. I begged, the man continued. I shouted. I cursed people when they passed me by. I became angry at the world. Abeni listened carefully. But you, he said, you fed that man with dignity. You showed me there was another way. Tears filled her eyes. That night, Abeni stood alone in the restaurant after everyone had left. The lights were dim. The city outside hummed softly. She walked through the dining area, touching the tables, the chairs, the walls. This is not mine, she whispered. It's borrowed. Borrowed time. Borrowed opportunity. She knew something deep inside life would test her again, and she would need to remember who she was before the applause. The applause did not last forever. It never did. For a while, Abeni's name floated gently through the city on radio shows, in short online clips, in whispered conversations at bus stops. People shared her story with pride, as if her kindness reflected something good about all of them. But as time passed, the noise softened. New stories replaced hers. New scandals, new heroes, new distractions. The crowd moved on, and in that quiet the weight returned. One morning, Abeni arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. The sky was still dim, the glass doors reflecting her tired face back at her. She unlocked the door herself and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar calm. For a moment she stood still, listening to the hum of the refrigerators, the distant sound of traffic waking up. She felt lonely. Not the kind of loneliness she knew before, when hunger and fear sat beside her on a thin mattress, but a different kind. This loneliness came from being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. As the day unfolded, small signs began to appear. A delivery was late. A supplier raised prices without warning. A staff member called in sick, overwhelmed and exhausted. None of it was dramatic. None of it was unusual, but together it felt heavy. That afternoon, one of the managers approached her carefully. "Madam," he said, lowering his voice, "some of the donors are asking questions." Abeni looked up. "What kind of questions?" "They want reports," he said. "They want proof of impact. Photos. Numbers. Some are saying they'll pull back if they don't see enough visibility." Abeni nodded slowly. She had known this day would come. That evening she attended a small community event where she had been invited to speak. The hall was modest, the chairs mismatched. As she stepped onto the stage, she scanned the room. Faces looked back at her, curious, hopeful, tired. She spoke honestly. "I didn't start helping people because I wanted attention," she said. "I did it because I knew what it felt like to be hungry and invisible." Applause followed, but it felt polite, restrained. After the event, a young woman approached her. "You inspire me," the woman said. "But do you ever get tired?" The question caught Abeni off guard. "Yes," she answered after a pause. "I do." That night, Abeni lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed with messages, requests, reminders, expectations. Everyone needed something. Everyone assumed she was strong enough to carry it. She turned the phone face down. For the first time since her life had changed, she wondered what would happen if she stopped. Not forever, just for a moment. The next Saturday, Abeni did not go with the food truck. She stayed home. The decision felt wrong immediately, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. She paced her living room, restless, checking the time again and again. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts loud. Around noon, she received a message from one of the volunteers. "Madam, the people are asking for you." Her heart twisted. She typed a response, erased it, typed again. "I'll be there," she finally sent. When she arrived at the usual stop, people turned in surprise. A small cheer went up, not loud but genuine. A boy she recognized ran toward her. "You came," he said, smiling wide. Abeni knelt and hugged him before she could stop herself. "I almost didn't," she admitted softly. "But you did," he replied, as if it was the simplest thing in the world. As she served food, her hands steadied. The noise in her head faded. The faces in front of her real present grateful grounded her in a way no applause ever could. Later that evening, Chief Adewale called. "I heard you took a break," he said. "Yes," Abeni replied, "and I hated it." He laughed quietly. "Purpose has a way of pulling us back," he said. "But remember, rest is not failure." Abeni sighed. "I'm afraid of becoming tired and bitter." "That fear," he replied, "means you're paying attention." After the call, Abeni sat alone on her balcony watching the city lights flicker. She thought about the road where she once stood, the dust, the laughter, the quiet dignity of a man in a wheelchair. She realized something important then. The crowd would always come and go. Praise would fade. Criticism would return. Expectations would rise. But the reason she started, the real reason, had nothing to do with any of it. It had to do with one simple choice made over and over again: to see another human being and respond with compassion. As long as she remembered that the silence would never defeat her, the city did not slow down for Abeni's doubts. Traffic still screamed every morning. People still hurried past one another with eyes fixed on survival. The hunger did not disappear just because one woman had found her way out of it. And the truth Abeni was beginning to understand slowly, painfully, was that doing good did not make life simpler. It made it heavier. Because now she knew too much. She knew the faces of people who slept under bridges. She knew which mothers skipped meals so their children could eat. She knew the quiet shame in a grown man's eyes when he accepted free food and whispered thank you like an apology. Once you know those things, you cannot unknow them. One afternoon, after a long meeting with suppliers and staff, Abeni locked herself in her office and cried. Not loud sobs, just tears slipping down her face while she stared at the wall. She was tired of being strong. She was tired of being an example. She was tired of being everyone's proof that kindness worked. There were days when she wished she could disappear into the background again. Sell food, quietly give what she could, and answer to no one. But that life was gone. That evening, a message arrived from someone unexpected. It was from Kola, a former customer from her roadside stall. He used to come late in the evenings when sales were slow. He always ordered the cheapest meal and apologized for counting his coins too slowly. Over time, he had stopped coming. Now he asked if they could meet. They sat at a small table inside the restaurant after closing hours. Kola looked uncomfortable in the clean space, his hands restless. "I didn't come to ask for help," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you." Abeni smiled faintly. "For what?" "For feeding me when I was ashamed," he replied. "You didn't know it, but I was unemployed for months. Your food was sometimes the only thing I ate." Abeni's chest tightened. "I got a job recently," Kola continued. "Not a big one, but I'm okay now." "I'm glad," she said sincerely. He hesitated, then added, "But I've seen people turn on you online. I've heard things." Abeni sighed. "People will always talk." Kola nodded. "I just wanted you to know it mattered. What you did, it still does." After he left, Abeni sat alone for a long time. That conversation stayed with her. Because for every loud voice questioning her choices, there were quiet ones like Kola's voices that never trended, never went viral, but carried truth. Still, the pressure continued. 1 week later, the city announced a new regulation affecting food distribution. Permits, fees, restrictions. Suddenly, the food trucks faced obstacles that felt suspiciously targeted. Abeni met with her team. "They're saying we need additional approvals," one coordinator explained. "It could delay operations for weeks." Abeni felt anger rise, hot and unfamiliar. "Why now?" she asked. No one answered. She went home that night furious. Furious at systems. Furious at hypocrisy. Furious that feeding people could be made so complicated. For the first time, bitterness knocked loudly on her door. She recognized it immediately. This was the moment that broke people. This was where kindness either hardened into resentment or disappeared entirely. The next day, she visited Chief Adawale unannounced. "I'm angry," she admitted the moment she sat down, "and I don't like who I am when I feel this way." He listened without interrupting. "They're making it difficult on purpose," she continued. "It feels like punishment for caring." Chief Adawale nodded slowly. "Do you know why the world resists people like you?" he asked. Abeni shook her head. "Because kindness exposes indifference," he said. "And indifference hates to be seen." She leaned back, absorbing his words. "You once fed me when it cost you something," he continued. "Now it costs you comfort, peace, and approval. This is the higher price." Abeni exhaled shakily. "I don't know if I can keep paying it." Chief Adawale looked at her steadily. "You don't have to save everyone," he said. "But you must decide who you want to be." That night, Abeni returned home and stood in front of the mirror. She saw two versions of herself reflected back. One was sharp-eyed, guarded, ready to protect what she had built by pulling back. That version looked safer, more efficient, more acceptable. The other version looked tired but open, vulnerable but honest. The girl who knelt by a wheelchair and said, "Even if the whole world forgets you, I won't." Abeni touched the glass. "I choose you," she whispered. The next morning she held a meeting. "We're not stopping the food truck," she told her team. "We'll adjust. We'll follow the law. We'll fight where we must, but we will not disappear." Some nodded. Some looked worried. "I won't promise this will be easy," she added. "But I promise it will be worth it." Weeks passed. Paperwork piled up. Delays frustrated everyone. But slowly, painfully, things moved forward. Then something unexpected happened. Other organizations began to speak up. Church groups, community leaders, small NGOs. They had seen Abeni's work. They had eaten the food, they had met the people, and they were not willing to stay silent. Support grew, not flashy, not dramatic, but steady. Abeni realized then that kindness multiplied quietly. Not in applause, but in alliances. One evening, as she walked through the restaurant after closing, she paused by the entrance. A man sat there in a wheelchair. Her heart skipped. For a brief, terrifying second, she thought of Papatunde. But this man was younger. His hands shook nervously as she approached. "I heard you help people," he said. Abeni knelt instinctively. "What's your name?" she asked. "Samson," he replied. She smiled gently. "Welcome, Samson," she said. "You're safe here." As she served him food, Abeni felt the weight lift just a little. Staying soft had a cost. But losing softness, she realized, would cost her everything. By the time the rainy season arrived, Abeni understood one hard truth: when you choose to remain kind in a world that rewards cruelty, the storm does not warn you before it comes. It arrived quietly. At first it was small things, missed calls that were never returned, meetings postponed without explanation, approvals that suddenly required further review. The food truck still moved, but slower. The smiles from certain officials felt thinner. Politeness had replaced cooperation. Abeni noticed everything. She had learned long ago to read the room when people pretended nothing was wrong. One morning, as she stood by the window of her office watching the rain trace thin lines down the glass, her operations manager knocked gently and stepped inside. "Madam," he said carefully, "there's something you should see." He placed a tablet on her desk. The headline burned into her eyes. "Charity or scam questions rise over Abeni food love." Her breath caught. She scrolled slowly. The article was cleverly written. No direct accusations, just questions, carefully planted doubt, anonymous sources, phrases like lack of transparency, possible misuse of funds, emotional storytelling used to manipulate the public. Her hands trembled. "This isn't true," she whispered. "I know," the manager said quietly. But it's spreading fast. By noon, radio hosts were debating her name. By evening, social media was filled with arguments. Some defended her passionately. Others turned vicious overnight. She was pretending to be humble. All rich people are the same. It was too good to be true. Abeni sat alone in her office long after everyone had gone home. This was worse than hunger. Hunger attacked the body. This attacked the soul. For the first time since her transformation, she felt truly powerless. She thought of Papa Tunda. She remembered how easily people laughed at him, how quickly they dismissed his humanity because he looked broken. Now she understood. This was the same cruelty, just dressed differently. That night, Abeni barely slept. By morning, a letter arrived from a regulatory body requesting a formal review of her charity operations. Nothing illegal, nothing alarming, but enough to shake donors, enough to slow everything down. Her phone rang constantly. Volunteers asked if they should pause activities. Staff asked if their jobs were safe. Community partners asked what was happening. Abeni had no answers. She sat on her bed staring at the wall, her chest tight with fear she hadn't felt in years. What if this destroys everything? She whispered. Not the restaurant, not the money, but the trust. She thought of the faces under the bridge, the children who waited without asking questions, the mothers who said prayers over plastic plates of food. If she fell, they would feel it first. That realization hurt more than any headline. That afternoon, Chief Adewale arrived at the restaurant unannounced. He walked into her office without ceremony and found her sitting in silence. "I saw it," he said. Abeni didn't look up. "I didn't build this to become a scandal," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help." Chief Adewale sat across from her. "This is the cost of visibility," he said. "When light shines, shadows fight back." She laughed bitterly. "I never asked for light." "No," he agreed. "But you earned it." Abeni rubbed her temples. What if they ruin everything she asked? What if people stop believing? Chief Adewale leaned forward. "Then we tell the truth," he said simply. She looked at him. The whole truth. That evening, a decision was made. A public forum was organized, not a press stunt, not a performance. Just truth spoken plainly. The hall filled slowly. Community leaders, journalists, volunteers, critics, supporters. Some came curious, others came angry. A few came hoping to see her fall. Abeni stood backstage, her hands shaking. "I can't do this," she whispered. Chief Adewale placed a hand on her shoulder. "You fed me when I had nothing to offer you," he said. "Now let me stand with you." When Abeni stepped onto the stage, the room went quiet. She took a breath. "My name is Abeni," she began, "and I used to sell food by the roadside." A murmur rippled through the audience. She told her story slowly, carefully, not to impress but to explain. She spoke of hunger, of loneliness, of Papa Tunda in the wheelchair, of how kindness was never a strategy, only a response. Then Chief Adewale stood. Gasps filled the room. "I was the man in the wheelchair," he said calmly. "And I was not testing the world. I was reminding myself what humanity looked like." He explained everything. The disguise, the choice, the reason. There were no theatrics, no dramatic pauses, just truth. Silence followed. Then questions came. Hard ones, skeptical ones, and Abeni answered all of them. Nothing hidden, nothing exaggerated. By the end of the night, something shifted. Not applause, relief. The storm did not end immediately, but it lost its power. The lies had been starved. As Abeni walked home that night, rain soaking her clothes, she felt exhausted but lighter. The worst had passed. She had not broken, and neither had her kindness. The morning after the public forum felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just still, like the city was deciding what it wanted to believe next. Abeni arrived at the restaurant earlier than she had in months. The sky was pale, washed clean by the night's rain. She stood at the entrance for a long moment before unlocking the door, her fingers resting on the cool metal handle. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and faint spices welcomed her, grounding her in something real. For the first time since the storm began, she exhaled without bracing herself. The staff trickled in slowly. Some avoided her eyes, unsure what to say. Others smiled timidly as if afraid hope might still be fragile. Then one of the waiters, a young man who had once told her he slept on his aunt's floor, approached her. "Madam," he said quietly, "thank you for yesterday." Abeni nodded. "Thank you for staying." That simple exchange carried more weight than any public statement. By midday, messages began to arrive. Not loud endorsements, not grand apologies, just notes, calls, emails, small confirmations that truth once spoken plainly had a way of finding its listeners. A community group asked if the food trucks could return to their area the following weekend. A local clinic offered to partner for free health checks during food distributions. A supplier reversed a sudden price hike, claiming it had been a misunderstanding. Nothing miraculous, but enough. Still, Abeni remained cautious. She had learned that calm could be temporary, and she no longer mistook quiet for safety. That afternoon, she drove to the bridge alone. No cameras, no volunteers, just her. She parked at a distance and walked toward the familiar concrete pillars, the air thick with dampness and the smell of rain-soaked earth. A few people recognized her and waved. Others watched silently. A small girl ran up to her and hugged her waist without warning. "You came back," the girl said. Abeni swallowed hard. "I did." The child nodded, as if that settled everything. As she stood there listening to the low hum of the city above them, Abeni realized something important. The people who mattered most had never doubted her. They had never needed explanations or evidence. They had judged her by consistency, not headlines. Later that evening, Abeni received a message from Auntie Marayo. "I watched the forum," it read. "You spoke with courage. I am proud of you." Abeni stared at the screen for a long moment. Pride was a complicated thing. She replied simply, "I hope you are well." Some wounds, she understood, did not need reopening to heal. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. The food trucks resumed their routes. The restaurant remained busy but not overwhelming. The noise online faded as attention drifted elsewhere, as it always did. What remained were the quiet routines. Abeni returned to walking through the kitchen each morning, greeting cooks by name. She resumed sitting with staff during breaks, listening more than speaking. She returned to kneeling when serving food outside, ignoring the occasional whispers from people who thought a woman in her position should stand apart. One afternoon, as she reviewed paperwork in her office, she noticed a familiar name on a volunteer list. Samson, the man in the wheelchair. She found him later that day outside, speaking nervously with the coordinator. "Samson," she said, smiling. He looked up, startled. "Madam Abeni." "You don't have to call me that," she said gently. "You wanted to help." He nodded. "I can't stand for long, but I can talk to people. I can help organize." Abeni studied him for a moment. "Then you're exactly who we need," she said. As weeks turned into months, Abeni noticed something else beginning to happen, something quieter than charity but just as powerful. People who had once stood in line for food began standing beside the tables, helping to serve. Volunteers who arrived broken and ashamed began leaving with purpose. Small connections formed, names were remembered, stories were shared. It wasn't just food being distributed anymore. It was dignity. One evening, Chief Adewale visited the restaurant after closing. He sat across from Abeni, watching her thoughtfully. "You handled the storm well," he said. "I survived it," she replied. He smiled. "There's a difference." Abeni leaned back in her chair. "I'm still afraid sometimes." "So am I," he admitted. The world doesn't get kinder because we want it to. She nodded. But it gets harder to ignore. Chief Adewale's eyes softened. That is how change actually works, he said. Not through noise, through presence. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. You know, he added, when I sat in that wheelchair, I thought I was testing humanity. Abeni raised an eyebrow. I was wrong, he continued. Humanity tested me. She smiled. After he left, Abeni walked through the empty restaurant one last time. She stopped in front of the framed photo on the wall, not of herself, but of the original roadside stall under the tree. Smoke, dust, a younger version of herself smiling into the sun. She touched the frame lightly. I remember, she whispered. That night, as Abeni lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the city, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, not the kind that comes from certainty or control. The kind that comes from alignment, when who you are matches what you do even when it costs you. The storm had passed, and she was still standing. As the year leaned toward its end, the city shifted in subtle ways. Markets grew louder, traffic thickened. People hurried with a familiar urgency that came with closing chapters and unfulfilled promises. For Abeni, the change in season brought reflection more than rest. She had survived hunger, anonymity, sudden wealth, public scrutiny, and quiet storms. Yet the question that now followed her everywhere was not about money or charity. It was about legacy. One morning, as she reviewed plans for expanding the food truck routes into neighboring districts, her assistant hesitated at the doorway. Madam, he said carefully, there's a proposal you should see. He placed a folder on her desk. A national foundation wanted to fund Abeni Food Love generously. In return, they requested rebranding, structured messaging, and a focus on high-visibility impact zones. Abeni read the document slowly. The offer was tempting. With that level of funding, she could feed thousands more people, build kitchens, employ more staff, scale beyond what she had imagined. But something in the language felt distant. That evening, she sat with the proposal spread out on her dining table, untouched food growing cold beside it. The city lights glowed outside her window as she weighed the cost of saying yes. She called Chief Adewale. They want to help, she said, but they want to control the story. He listened quietly. What story do they want? He asked. That generosity looks good, Abeni replied. That helping is a brand. Chief Adewale was silent for a moment. And what story do you want? He asked. Abeni looked at her hands. That kindness is ordinary, she said slowly, that it doesn't need permission. The next day, she invited representatives of the foundation to the restaurant. They spoke eloquently about reach optics and partnerships. When they finished, Abeni thanked them sincerely. Then she declined. Their smiles froze politely. We appreciate your interest, she said calmly, but I need to remain close to the people we serve. I don't want them to become an image. After they left, doubt lingered. Had she just turned away an opportunity to do more good? The question followed her for days. The answer came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Abeni visited a new distribution point near the edge of the city. It was quieter there, fewer cameras, fewer passers-by. As she served food, an elderly woman approached slowly, leaning heavily on a stick. Her back was bent, her steps careful. I don't need food today, the woman said softly. Abeni paused. Are you sure? The woman nodded. I came to thank you. For what? For not making us feel like projects, she replied. You look us in the eyes. Abeni felt something tighten in her chest. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, a group of volunteers gathered around, folding tables, laughing quietly as they packed containers. Abeni watched them from a distance, This was the work, not the headlines, not the funding, presence. Meanwhile, life continued to test her boundaries. A business competitor attempted to poach her staff with higher salaries. Abeni gathered her team and spoke honestly. "I can't promise to outpay everyone," she said, "but I promise transparency and respect. Some stayed, some left." She wished them well. Growth, she was learning, was not about holding on tightly. It was about letting go without bitterness. One evening, Abeni returned to the old roadside where her stall had once stood. The tree was still there, its branches wide and patient. The ground beneath it was worn smooth by years of footsteps. She stood quietly, memories rising uninvited. She could almost hear the creak of wheelchair wheels. Creak, creak, creak. Her throat tightened. A young boy selling oranges approached her hesitantly. "Are you the woman from the story?" he asked. Abeni smiled. "Maybe. My mother says you helped a man everyone ignored," he continued. "She says that means anyone can matter." Abeni knelt to his level. "Your mother is right," she said. As she walked away, Abeni understood that stories did not belong to those who told them, but to those who carried them forward. Weeks later, a letter arrived from a small rural community. They had heard of Abeni Food Love. They had no media presence, no sponsors, just need. Abeni packed a bag and went herself. The road was rough, the reception minimal, the need immense. She slept on a thin mattress that night, listening to insects and distant voices reminded of her early years. It was uncomfortable. It was familiar. In the morning, as she served food beneath a makeshift canopy, she felt grounded in a way no office meeting could provide. Abeni realized then that her legacy would not be measured by scale alone. It would be measured by fidelity to her values, to her beginnings, to the promise she made without words when she knelt beside a man in a wheelchair and chose compassion over convenience. That promise still guided her, and as long as it did, her work would remain true. The invitation arrived without noise. No letterhead, no press release. Just a quiet message delivered through one of the coordinators Abeni trusted most. "There's someone asking for you," the message read. "He says he once sat where your Papa Tunda used to sit." Abeni felt the air leave her lungs. She asked where. "Near the old bus terminal," the coordinator replied. "Under the concrete awning. He's been there for days." That evening, Abeni did not send the food truck ahead. She went herself. The bus terminal smelled of diesel and rain-soaked dust. Voices overlapped, drivers shouting destinations, passengers arguing over fares, radios crackling with static. Under the awning, shadows gathered where the lights did not reach. She saw him immediately. He was older than she expected, his frame thin, his posture curved inward as if trying to disappear. A worn blanket rested over his legs. His eyes followed the movement of people without ever meeting their gaze. Abeni approached slowly and crouched in front of him. "Good evening," she said gently. The man flinched, then looked up. His eyes widened, not with recognition but with surprise that someone had spoken to him softly. "I heard you were looking for me." Abeni continued. The man swallowed. "I heard your story," he said quietly. "I heard about the beggar, the billionaire, the woman who didn't look away." Abeni nodded. "I didn't look away." He lowered his head. "I did," he said. She waited. "Years ago," he continued, "I passed a man in a wheelchair every day. I mocked him. Sometimes I kicked his chair when no one was watching. I told myself he was pretending." Abeni's chest tightened. "One day he disappeared," the man said. "And not long after, my life fell apart. Lost my job, lost my family, lost myself." He finally looked up at her. "When I heard the truth," he whispered, "I understood what I had done. I don't want money, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." The noise of the terminal seemed to fade. Abeni felt anger stir hot and fast. The memory of Papa Tunde's bowed head flashed before her eyes. Then she breathed, slowly, deeply. I don't speak for him, she said at last, but I can choose what I do now. She stood and gestured to a container beside her. Eat, she said. The man hesitated, then accepted the food with shaking hands. Tears dropped into the rice as he ate. Abeni watched quietly. Forgiveness, she realized, was not forgetting. It was refusing to carry poison longer than necessary. As she walked away, she felt the circle begin to close. The following week, Chief Adewale called. I'm stepping back, he said. Abeni frowned. From what? From visibility, he replied. I've done my part. This is yours now. She was silent for a moment. I didn't ask for this, she said softly. I know, he replied. That's why it works. They met one last time at the restaurant after closing. No staff, no cameras, just two people who had shared a strange chapter of life. You gave me something I didn't know I had lost, Chief Adewale said. My faith in quiet goodness. Abeni smiled faintly. You gave me a future. He shook his head. No. You gave it to yourself. When he left, Abeni remained seated long after the lights dimmed. The next morning, she visited the old roadside one final time. The wooden stall was gone, now replaced by a phone accessories shop. The tree still stood, though its branches were thinner, its leaves fewer. Abeni stood beneath it, remembering smoke in her hair, coins in her palm, hunger humming in her bones. She placed her hand against the trunk. Thank you, she whispered, not to the tree, but to the girl she used to be. Later that day, she announced a quiet change. Abeni's place would continue. The food trucks would continue, but leadership would shift outward. Community members would train others. Volunteers would become coordinators. The work would no longer rest on one name. Some were confused. Why step back when everything is working, they asked. Abeni answered simply. Because kindness should not depend on one person. As evening fell, she walked through a neighborhood where a small group gathered around a table of food served by people she had trained, guided, then released. No one recognized her, and that felt right. As she turned the corner, a wheelchair rolled slowly past her. Creak, creak, creak. Her heart stopped for a breath, but it was not Papa Tunde. It was a young man, his hands strong, his eyes alert. He met her gaze and nodded politely. Abeni smiled and nodded back. The circle had closed. What began as a single act of quiet compassion had become a path others could walk without knowing her name, without knowing the story, without knowing the test that started it all. And that she knew was the truest kind of ending. Years passed quietly. Not the kind of years that make headlines, but the kind that reshape lives slowly, almost invisibly. The city of Lagos changed as cities always do. New buildings rose, old ones crumbled. Roads were widened, then broken again. People came and went, chasing survival, chasing hope. And in the middle of all that movement, something steady remained: kindness. Abeni no longer appeared at the front of things. Her name was no longer printed boldly on banners. Interviews stopped coming. Online debates found new targets. To many, she had faded into the background. That was intentional. She now spent most of her days visiting quietly, sitting in planning meetings without speaking much, walking through food distribution points unnoticed, listening more than leading. The work no longer depended on her presence, and that was exactly how she wanted it. One afternoon, she visited a secondary school on the outskirts of the city. A small hall had been set aside for a student program focused on community service. She sat at the back, unintroduced, as the facilitator spoke. Kindness is not charity, the facilitator said. It's responsibility. Abeni smiled faintly. After the session, a young girl approached her shyly. Ma, the girl said, can I ask you something? Of course, Abeni replied. Do you think someone like me can change anything? The girl asked. I don't have money or connections. Abeni studied her face, so earnest, so familiar. I once had nothing but a pot of food and a choice, she said gently. That was enough. The girl nodded slowly as if storing the words for later. That evening, Abeni walked alone through a familiar neighborhood. Not far away, under a bridge, a group of people gathered around a folding table, sharing food and laughter. The volunteers running it moved with ease, confidence, and care. They knew what they were doing. She stood at a distance, unnoticed. This was the moment she had worked toward, not being needed. At home that night, Abeni sat by her window, listening to the sounds of the city settling into sleep. She thought about Chief Adawale and wondered where he was now. Perhaps traveling. Perhaps watching another quiet act of goodness somewhere else. She hoped he was at peace. She also thought about Papatunda, the name she had given a stranger because she refused to leave him nameless. She realized then that she had never truly lost him. He lived in every volunteer who knelt to serve food instead of standing above someone. He lived in every coordinator who insisted on dignity over efficiency. He lived in every person who chose to see even when it was uncomfortable. One morning, Abeni received a message from a coordinator in a distant town. We met a woman today, it read. She feeds a man in a wheelchair every afternoon. Says she heard a story once and decided to try. Abeni closed her eyes. The story had moved on without her. Later that week, she returned once more to the old bus terminal, not because she was needed, but because she wanted to remember. The awning still stood. The noise still rose and fell like waves. People still passed by one another, wrapped in their own concerns. She noticed a man sitting on the ground, struggling to adjust a broken crutch. Without thinking, she approached and knelt. "Can I help?" she asked. The man looked up, startled. "Yes," he said softly. She fixed the strap carefully, then helped him stand. "Thank you," he whispered. Abeni smiled, stood and walked away. He would never know her name, and that was fine. As evening fell, Abeni reflected on everything her life had been. Hunger, fear, generosity, wealth, scrutiny, forgiveness. None of it had been wasted, not even the pain. She understood now that kindness was not a transaction. It was not a test. It was not a shortcut to blessing. It was a way of being, and the world, for all its cruelty and noise, still responded to it slowly, imperfectly, but truly. Because somewhere right now, someone was choosing not to look away. And that choice would ripple outward long after her story stopped being told. This story reminds us that kindness is not measured by how much we have, but by how willing we are to see another human being as worthy of care. Abeni did not give because she expected a reward. She gave because she understood hunger, loneliness, and invisibility. Her life changed not because she fed a billionaire in disguise, but because she refused to let hardship turn her heart cold. The world often teaches us to protect ourselves first, to look away when suffering makes us uncomfortable, to believe that small actions do not matter. But this story gently proves the opposite. One quiet act of compassion repeated with sincerity can outgrow poverty, silence cruelty, and build a future no one could predict. True goodness is rarely loud. It happens when no one is watching, when giving costs us something, and when we choose dignity over convenience. Even when kindness is tested, misunderstood, or attacked, it still leaves a mark that cannot be erased. You may never know who is watching your actions, or how far your compassion will travel. But it always reaches further than you think. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on what kindness means in your own life. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. Your voice matters here. And if you want to keep experiencing stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay connected for the next story.